actually write their responses and come fully prepared. So the responses that you hear today are not the impromptu responses. They are well prepared and research responses. And I hope that you will enjoy this session equally as you have enjoyed the rest of the session so far. As you know, this webinar series is a proper sequence of webinars. We had two webinars before. One was on sales. The other one was on operations. Today, we are going to cover a very important aspect of supply chain. And to make it interesting and more value adding, instead of one, we have two sessions for you. And these sessions are, number one, the first session is a presentation from our consulting team. The topic is equally interesting. We're talking about building supply chain for direct to consumer channel. I'll explain what exactly we mean by direct to consumer channel. And the second session is a panel discussion on the new paradigms of distribution with a focus on supply chain. So our esteemed speakers with their rich experiences from organizations like Udan, LG, and Urban Ladder are already here. I'll come to the first session first and set the context before I hand over to my colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, with social distancing and the brick and mortar stores, the state which they are into currently, we believe that there is going to be a vacuum created because the stores are not likely to get open sooner. It may take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. We are guessing at this point in time. So if we take 40 to 80% of our sales, which was coming through these stores, that is going to be sort of getting lost somewhere, or maybe it gets channelized through a different channel once the lockdown is lifted. Now, what we believe is this will create an opportunity for brands and to engage and to sell to consumers through either websites, phone, Salesforce, or catalog. Now, this is what we call as D2C, which is direct to consumer. Then instead of going through a retail channel of somebody else, you also create your own channel to reach out to the customers. And what we also believe is that this channel will have its own space and role, which can coexist with your other channels. So there is no need to say that we are talking about that this will replace your stores, modern trade, the general trade, or the marketplaces that you have been going so far. It's just that it will have its own objectives and role to play going forward, and very important one as well. So we are going to talk about the supply chain aspect of this important channel. And to take you through the presentation, we have two colleagues of ours. One is Sachin Jagtap and other one is Siddharth Shrivastava, who lead our supply chain practice. From a lineage of IIT, IM, and MIT, they bring in 3 decades of rich supply chain wisdom from organizations like HUL, top-notch consulting firms, and their own venture of a very exciting logistics company, which was there into last mile delivery. Welcome, Sachin and Sid.
Thank you, Anil.
Okay. So I think with that, I would request Sachin and Sid to take over, to take us through for another 20 minutes on the presentation of D2C supply chain. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Anil. And a very good afternoon to our esteemed panelists and our very engaging audience. Like Anil mentioned, we are here to discuss a very exciting topic in these times. Everyone's talking about supply chain and how it is breaking and how it is creating disruptions. And what we are going to discuss about is a very specific a very specific topic on direct to consumer channel and the direct to consumer supply chain. Um, so, and as Anil mentioned, that direct to consumer is a space that is growing in itself. It is going to also be an important part of several brands. Um, and to set the context, let's just take a one step back and see some projections on the trade channels. We're not going to spend much time. We understand that e-commerce and modern trade are the growth factors going forward, and the market size is increasing. There is also a shift within e-commerce, which categories are going to lead the change or lead the charge. But it is sufficient to say that e-commerce is going to grow, and direct to consumer channel will become an important part of the e-commerce overall e-commerce play as we move forward. Now, as far as direct to consumer is concerned, why is it that it is becoming such an interesting theory to look at, or it's such an interesting aspect to look at? I think there are many factors around that. Without getting into too much detail, the biggest factor that we feel is important is the fact that the brands can reach directly to the customer, and that means data. So you understand your customer, you understand the preferences, and you are collecting data that was not possible before through other channels. And with the improvement in digital penetration, technology, last mile logistics, in general supply chain, I think reaching directly to the consumer is becoming easier by the day. It may not be as straightforward for a lot of brands, but it is definitely improving. And as far as COVID-19 is concerned, I think that has created a new sort of a currency in the market today, which is trust. Because customers are now expecting and they're looking for brands online, what they can't get through traditional retail today. There's some level of expectation that is building up in terms of being present online. So moving on, uh, from a direct to consumer perspective, what is it that is different, right? It's not just the fact that you are retailing online. It's definitely more than that, and it gets a bit tricky because depending on the channel that you are going through, you are basically doing a trade-off between the level of control over the retail and basically the demand and the level of control over the supply chain. Now, in short terms, a lot of brands might say that the volumes and the value and the margins are not that attractive in direct to consumer. But the fact remains that the level of control over the channel, both the retail and the supply chain, is very high when you go direct to consumer. And the trick, I guess, is to find the right balance and grow in the right direction. It is easy to set up your store on a Flipkart or an Amazon, but you're also giving up margins over there. When you go direct to consumer through your own channel, you have to take into consideration several important factors. Um, can you please? Yeah. So creating an independent D2C setup may not be for everyone. There are brands that were born online, and they basically grew and became very popular. For example, 1+7 is a very good example of a brand that was created online and that has thrived online. But traditional brands may not find it very easy to set up on a direct to consumer or an online channel, because they have to recreate their supply chain from or change their supply chain from what it exists today, and that may not be as straightforward. The other aspect is you need to have the right product that can create the right kind of pull in the direct to consumer space, and it takes time. And there are several models, whether it's subscription based or even auto replenishment models, that may become very important for certain product categories in the future. So why has, looking from a brand lens, why has D2C not taken off for existing brands? And there are many reasons, as we discussed, but the biggest one, as we just mentioned, is the fine balance between the demand and the supply chain, and that is not easy to create over a short period of time. The requirements of a direct to consumer supply chain are quite different from the traditional brick and mortar channel. And the even from a demand perspective, in the short term there may be some cannibalization. It is not easy to fulfill the customer expectations, and the market may seem very small. But if done right, and if done the right way, and if the right supply chain is built, this channel can become a very strategic lever for the brands. And that is basically the point or the discussion of this presentation, which my colleague Sachin will now take over and go one level deeper into what it takes to build a direct to consumer supply chain, and why is it so different from the traditional supply chain.
Yeah, thank you, Siddharth. So before we, dive deeper into understanding the direct to consumer supply chain, let's look at some of the requirements for a direct to consumer supply chain. So it's the whole approach, if you look at it, is oriented towards serving the customer. While initially, for a traditional brand, the approach might be to serve your customer, which could be the retailer or your distributor or your wholesaler, and that makes a lot of difference. So here, you might have to deliver with great speed because the customer may not.
Sachin, sorry to interrupt you. You're not audible, at least to me.
Okay, is it better now?
Yeah, that's better. I think you will have to speak louder. Maybe there are issues with the microphone.
Okay. Yeah. So the point is that before we look and dissect the direct to consumer supply chain, what we need to understand is that the supply chain itself is different in the sense that it is oriented towards serving the end consumer. While traditionally, a brand would be trying to serve its authorized distributor or retailer, which means a lot more factors come into play. First, speed, because your consumer is impatient, and once the consumer orders, they may expect delivery within a very short period of time. You need to be agile because the consumer has various requirements, so you may need to be sort of flexible and responsive. And you should not forget that it's an omni-channel approach. So when you are doing direct to consumer, you have to know that you also have your traditional channel. You may even have another e-commerce channel. You may have your modern trade channel. So you have to balance the channel conflicts and also the requirements of all supply chains, right? Personalization, I briefly talked about. Consumers, when you are approaching them directly, expect a certain level of personalization. They might want products to be gift wrapped or customized for their own requirements. Returns is another thing. It has become a sort of a standard that if the customer is not happy, they would want to return, and you would have to pick that up. You need to have a reverse supply chain. Cash on delivery is something, again, that at least in the Indian context is something which you probably, so there's a whole finance and payments angle to it as well. With that, I'll probably try to explain the supply chain over the next 3 slides. So essentially, the direct to consumer supply chain has 3 parts. There's a primary part, there's a secondary part, and finally there's the last mile part. Right?
Sachin, there is still a request coming in that your voice is a little low, and you may like to speak a little louder.
Okay. Yeah. So what I was saying is that the supply chain of direct to consumer is actually in three parts. So there's a primary part, there's a secondary supply chain, and then there is a secondary distribution, and then there is a last mile distribution. So it's important to understand it in these three different segments because they're quite different and the needs are quite different across all three. So in the primary segment, the focus, the key focus is about order management, right? So the idea is that you are able to take the order from the customer, and for that, typically you have three options. You have the web store, you have the mobile store or the mobile app, and lastly you have the phone. You can place your orders through phone. In fact, the phone order system is not something new. So in that sense, direct to consumer is not new. Throughout last century, you've had, since the onset of television, you have had tele-shopping companies. Then you've got catalog shopping. In fact, the first instance of D2C was through a mail order system in 1861, when the Welsh warehouse, the Royal Welsh Warehouse set up a mail order system. They distributed pamphlets and people ordered through post and actually received their goods through post. So it's quite old. But the key point here is that, setting up a robust ordering system is very important. And for here, you need to leverage technology, right? Both in terms of what kind of interface that you create, but also that you need to capture a lot of data, because we are now living in an age where data is most probably more vital than most other things. So that data is important for us to capture and then analyze for maximizing the benefits of DTC channels. The primary supply chain typically remains the same. So you can use the same supply chain that you are using for your other channels to distribute right up till your distribution center. Coming to the secondary part of the supply chain. Now, in the secondary distribution, here things become quite different from a supply chain perspective. Now, the challenge here is that in your traditional supply chain, you are delivering large volumes to your distributors or retailers, right? Now you have to basically distribute very small fragmented volumes to a large number of consumers spread across the city. So what you would need is, and it's not possible, from your one or two distribution centers in the city to reach directly to the consumers. So what typically you'd need is another layer of stocking, and that could be in the form of either a dark store. So if your volumes are very high, you can have actually a mini warehouse, or actually you can have a number of mini warehouses within the city. The sole purpose of these mini warehouses is basically to stock products and then distribute to customers. They can be transshipment, or they can even stock them for a longer time. Another option you have, and it's very good when you're starting out, is to use a logistics service provider. That's what we mean by an LSP. And the LSP might just pick it from your warehouse, have their own distribution center, and then they will also have their own delivery centers, just like dark stores within the city. And you've got so many companies with e-commerce coming up, like Delivery, Ecom Express, Expressbees, who can do that and who kind of specialize in this. They can also do the last mile, which we'll talk in the next slide. Another option is to use the retail store. Now, this is not optimal because the retail store is designed to welcome the customers and serve the customers who walk in. But if if there are fewer footfalls, if your utilization of manpower is less in the store, maybe you can give them some D2C duties as well, especially if your volumes are lower at the start. So these are three different ways of setting up your secondary supply chain. Now comes the last and the most interesting part, and this is about the last mile delivery. And most interesting because this is the make or break, because here if you are not able to deliver your customer, fulfill their service level, their expectations, and maintain your cost, then you are doomed, because 40% on an approximately 40% of the D2C logistics cost is in the last mile. And the reason for that is because you're not carrying loads in large trucks and the cost is getting distributed. Here, you are carrying small loads right till the customer's end, and that's where the cost actually blows up. Now, before we look at different ways where you can get to the customer's home, we should not forget that there is, when we talk about direct to consumer, there's also a click and collect option. So it's not necessary that you have to always get the products to the consumer's home. The consumer may buy your product through an online or phone and may prefer to go and collect it at your store, retail store, or even a dark store or through an LSP delivery center. But this is not something you can force on the customer. So this may be an option, but this may not necessarily be the norm, right? So in here, basically, like I said, you have got to deliver small fragmented quantities to a large number. So you will basically, hire one more leg of transport to reach the customer. Now here there are some interesting decisions which you need to make. One is outsourcing versus in-house, right? And often companies think, this is not the core competency that we should by default outsource. But this is not necessarily so. The reason is that a logistics service provider actually may struggle to do it cheaper than you and may not actually also understand the requirements of your business or your consumer. And the reason is that the reason for not being able to do it cheaper is that they will struggle to combine loads of different brands and hence achieve scale, because the delivery points or consumers are different, the needs are different. So effectively they might have to set up a different kind of account chain and everything for different consumers. So but they would still charge you a margin and charge you GST. So that is why they may not necessarily be able to do it cheaper, but sometimes they can also by using some sort of optimization and technology. But that is also open to you. So that is about the outsourcing bit. And another decision is delivery boy versus salesman. So the whole idea of D2C is to have a greater consumer connect. And so here it is possible that you can also use a salesman. Now, if many of you would recall Eureka Forbes original model, where they used to have a salesman who used to come to your house, give you a demonstration of the product and sell it, and even probably help you to install it. So these kinds of services like installation, customer awareness, or even selling, you can bring some variants and help the customer choose. These kinds of value added sales services, you may want to go for a salesman come delivery boy rather than just a delivery boy. Another critical decision that you have to make is between a van versus two-wheeler. Now, ideally, like I said, a van would probably be cheaper because you can carry larger loads. But then the nature of last mile delivery, when you have to service in a very short duration of time, demand is uncertain, it's fragmented. Today, one house, you're getting an order from one cluster, tomorrow it could be very spread out. So unless you have a subscription-based model, where you have done a fixed run in the morning or at some time period, or there is a huge predictable density of demand, van deliveries may not make sense, right? The two-wheeler will probably be cheaper. And there's obviously a lot more flexibility. You have to pay less toll, taxes, less restrictions in city movement. So these are some of the decisions in the last mile supply chain. Now coming to how to set up, what would be the D2C roadmap. So basically, it all revolves around the 4 key components. There is channel strategy, and like we said, consumer expectations are very key over here. Then you also need to keep in mind what are your brand goals, brand expectations, and of course you have to manage channel conflict and channel expectations. Product strategy, you have to have optimal packaging, personalization for the customer. Customer service, very important, because now your retail is not doing the customer service for you. You are directly in touch with the customer, so you have to take care of customer service. Distribution strategy, of course, we talked about network design, especially for secondary. Last mile, you have to understand how your last mile volumes will grow density and choose and keep evolving your last mile delivery models. You have to provide reverse logistics, and just like you need to have data on your consumers, you need to have good visibility of your inventory. Otherwise, your last mile will fail if you're not able to serve the customer. Investment technology, we can't talk about it enough. For your online experience, for managing your logistics, and for your data analytics, this will be key, especially if you are doing more and more in-house logistics management software solutions. They are available off the shelf also if you want, or you can develop them in-house. Right. So this is broadly speaking about the D2C roadmap. And what we'd like to do is we thought we'd share a very interesting case study about last mile optimization, just to sort of tell you about, explain to you how complexities are there. So, we had a large MNC brand, which actually decided to set up its own DTC channel along with a distribution partner that they already had. for the traditional supply chain. And one of the products was the printer cartridges. Now, what happens in printer cartridges, especially when you are selling to retail or consumers, is that even if it's going to run out, they're low on ink, they'll often order it only when it's probably when the ink is finished, when the last page is printed. And at that time, they need same day delivery. And despite high delivery charges, they were not able to do this. And the first thing that we noticed was that there was an ad hoc system. Orders were sort of order comes in and they would go on processing that order. So what we did was, first we streamlined the process of consolidating orders. We created 2 batches of 4 hours each, and we created a very quick process where the orders would be consolidated, and with the help of some algorithms we could do the delivery scheduling and routing. Now with that in place, what we did was we used a relay kind of distribution mechanism. So a lot of cartridges can come in a bag. So with 1 or 2 riders, you can actually service a lot of demand. And if it's more than 2 riders, then probably a van makes more sense. We would do a sort of run for delivering demand for 6 clusters in the city, and that we would finish in about 1 to 1.5 hours. And then within these clusters, we would have pre-positioned riders who would then further complete the deliveries within the clusters within another 2.5 hours. So the result was that within 4 hours, we were able to achieve 96% on-time delivery performance, which earlier was less than 80%. And not only that, we were also able to reduce the cost directly by 20%. The per delivery cost was reduced by 20%. So the point is that, D2C, yes, there are advantages. A lot of people will go, especially after COVID. But and there are challenges, but the challenges are something which you can easily meet with some sort of innovation and hard work, and it should not really be something that should stop you. So I will pause here, and I will hand over the mic to Anil, who will probably summarize this and also tell you a little bit about OCS. Thank you, Anil.
Yeah, okay. So thanks, Sachin. Am I audible, Sachin?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Sachin, thank you so much. It's very interesting presentation. We walked through why DTC, and also you talked about the elements of supply chain to build that DTC model. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to summarize here that D2C is an interesting proposition which is emerging because stores may not get open at all, or they may open in smaller quantities and in lesser amount of time. So what do you do as a brands like Mitsubishi, LG, or let's say ITC's brand, okay? Should they wait for retail stores to get open, or they have their own channel deployed and directly reach to customers' home? That's the proposition which is emerging for another 9 months or 12 months or so. And it's not a very recent phenomena, D2C. It's been existing for quite some time. And I think the epitome of success of D2C is, ladies and gentlemen, if you see a brand called Dollar a Shave. I don't know how many of you have heard about Dollar a Shave. If you have heard, please say yes. It's a very interesting brand which got into prominence maybe 2 years back or so. And they gave a very tough competition to the market leader in the shaving category. They were from P&G was brought down from 90% market to a 70% market share in US. And this brand is purely D2C model. I'll urge all of you to go into the website and find out how interesting that brand has been created. So we feel that it's an alternative channel which definitely one should explore. At the same time, we are also saying that it can complement your other channel. It's not to replace store, marketplaces. And we need to define our strategy and roles of the channel, because you could say that, my most premium products are going to be through my website. Or you can say that my service levels or the content on my website is going to be far, far superior than store or the marketplace, because there you don't have control at all. Or maybe certain pricing things that you want to do in the channel. That's quite possible when you have a direct to control phenomena possible. And rightly pointed out by several of you that DTC may have a higher cost in some cases. Then one has to evaluate. And what we are seeing is that for certain categories like subscription-based model, for example, shaving products every month you consume, for premium, the subscription can be there for millions of customers staying in India. Or if your brand has a niche component, which is getting lost on the shelf space of 30,000 SKUs, there is a possibility of D2C. So you have to evaluate exactly whether DTC or D2C is for you or not, and then come into the dynamics of supply chain. Now, we said supply chain is very different for D2C and needs a completely rethinking from scratch. But at the same time, what we believe is, given its attractiveness and the strong ecosystems that is emerging by the logistics, technology, and consulting partners, it can be built up very quickly. There is, of course, the question few months back whether be or not to be, the Shakespeare proverb. But I feel that there is now a more chance of to be than not to be. So you may like to probe it and see how feasible B2C is for you. And if you need any help, we are there to help you out in planning your strategy as well as doing this supply chain bit for you. With this, we are coming to end of this presentation. Before that, we jump on to the second part of the presentation. I just want to, and many of the participants have come back and saying that, Anil, you've been talking about the industry situations, but we don't know one consulting firm as yet. I mean, what do you do exactly? And so, and on their request, we have a slide or so which talks about what do we do exactly, and how can we help our customers. So there are three areas, ladies and gentlemen, for you of our services, right from strategy, performance improvement, and technology. Strategy is business strategy, which is growth or entry. The cornerstone of our services is that of performance improvement, where we do the entire supply chain right from the customer experience, digital marketing, to store, to supply chain, to merchandising, to procurement. We do that, and we believe that technology plays a very important role in terms of achieving that objective. So we have people who understand digital, AI, and transformation bit in a very, very strong manner. So these are three things that we do for our customers. And some of the clients that we have worked in the past are, if you can jump to the next slide, please, Sachin. The next slide, please. So these are some of the clients that we have worked in the past. We have been active as consulting team for last 20 years individually, and there's huge amount of transformation work that has gone in our areas of expertise. So I think with this, ladies and gentlemen, this presentation, of course, will be available to you. And we now go on to the interesting aspect of the session today. Thank you, Sid, and thank you, and Sachin, for providing us those insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, this is even more interesting now because we are going to have the panel discussion starting now. The topic is even more interesting, that what is the distribution channel post-COVID likely to be? Because, as we're saying that the sales channels are shifting, the e-channels are coming into play, DT or D2C may become more pronounced. So to discuss that channel and the implication of supply chain, we have three distinguished speakers whose experience is just par excellence, I would say. So I'll introduce them to you very quickly. So first speaker is Dr. Deepak Taneja. Deepak has over 2 decades of experience across multiple categories and geographies. What I understand is he is a pioneer in e-commerce. He was one of the first one to get into e-commerce when he spearheaded Times Internet Group way back in 2005 or even earlier. I don't recall the exact year. Later on, he worked and led various units at Nokia and Microsoft. Currently, he's business head of LG online and e-commerce business. Deepak, welcome to the session. Deepak, you there? Hello? Deepak, you there?
We may need to unmute him.
Okay, so I keep going to the other speaker, Tanushri Bagrodia. Welcome, Tanushri.
Okay, I'm back. Hi, Anil.
Hi, Deepak. Welcome back. For a moment, I had lost my breath. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we again have back to the speakers, Tanushri Bagrodia. Tanushri is the head of finance and head of enterprise business at Udaan Credit. For those of you who do not know Udaan is a digital distribution startup with over $2 billion of valuation, which is truly revolutionizing the distribution in India. Tanushri has been awarded the top 100 CFO honors for last 4 years in a row. And we need to check with Tanushri that how she manages to get awards that consistently later on after the session. And of course, she has been among the top 3 women CFO in the country, nominated at the ET Prime Women Leadership Awards as well. So she brings in a global experience of investment banking, worked on key deals with Kotak Mahindra HVB before joining the industry as CFO of NRB Bearing. Welcome, Tanushri.
Thank you, Anil.
Okay, great having you there. So Ajit, the third speaker, last but not the least, Ajit Joshi, with I think the name suggests that full of Josh. Ajit actually does not require any introduction. He has led the retail industry for the last 25 years or even more. He was the CEO of Chroma, the COO of Urban Ladder, and Vice President of Shopperstock. An interesting aspect which people do not know about him is that he has also spearheaded the gigantic task of organizing the Sydney Olympics in Australia. Wow. So Ajit, truly honored to have you and other speakers here.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. Okay.
Anil, I had the fortune of working with you as well when I was with Chroma and you were with TCS. So we know each other pretty well too. And we got junctions as well.
Absolutely delighted to have engaged here once again. So I think with this, I'll get to the questions. We'll start with Deepak and then go on to other speakers. So Deepak, what do you think is how is the distribution evolving post-COVID? Distribution system, given let's say the channel is also evolving.
Sure. Okay. So, fundamentally, I've been a sales and marketing person. So I will bring in, what's going to happen according to me post-COVID from a consumer perspective. I think a few trends will follow. Number one, the consumer affinity towards different channels will change, which means that, there'll be an inherent worry in the consumer's mind to go into, crowded places, etc. So therefore, I would say that e-commerce will become significantly important as we go on. And e-commerce has 2 components. One component is, marketplaces, which is really big today from that space point of view. And second is D2C, as you were talking about. And within e-commerce, I think different categories will have different weightage depending on how consumer interacts with those products and how the consumer and she consumes it. I feel consumer electronics, IT will get favors on e-commerce because these are standardized products, standardized experiences. Small appliances would be followed by that, and large appliances, home appliances, will have a lower affinity, and retail will continue to push that. The second thing why I believe e-commerce will also become important is that if you look at the demographic base of India, we have 50% base under 35 today. And what COVID has taught a lot of seniors in the country is today using digital content and digital media, digital payments, etc. So there'll be the affinity to e-commerce will increase because the overall addressable base will kind of increase. By saying that, I don't mean that offline will not be relevant. Offline will continue to be very relevant because the two critical months which we have lost, that demand lost will not be recovered by e-commerce simply because they are still operating on a very small base. So if that demand loss was to be covered, e-commerce would have to grow by multiple x's there. So in that sense, while e-commerce will become relevant, but it won't compensate for the demand loss per se. And lastly, a lot of brands, like you said, will start looking at D2C in a serious way because, in these times, there are a lot of activities and there is a reach to your loyal customers can be done through D2C. However, as Siddharth and Sachin were pointing out that, setting up D2C is an enormous task and there will be a lot of investments which will happen. And last but not the least, I think, when all of us started, basically modern trade was the buzzword. People like me who started 20 years back, modern trade was the buzzword. You were in KSA that time, and people were publishing that India retail is missing one generation of retail, which is, modern trade, and then online kind of came in. Modern trade especially may get impacted because may get impacted broadly in short and mid term. And I feel that a lot of modern trade retailers will start looking at their online channels as well. So that's what is going to happen
Sure.
according to me. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. So I think you gave a very good landscape of the things, especially the consumer electronics part, Deepak. Thank you so much. I think we'll straight go to Ajit for his perspective that how do you see channel evolving and distribution evolving for your categories, maybe furniture, and you can comment also on electronics because you've seen electronics very, very closely.
Sure. So I would first divide the immediate future into three parts. Just say between May to September, what will be the scenario?
Yeah.
We had to look at September to December, rather October to December, because that's when we will have the festive season and how the customers react. Hopefully they react positively will be the way to look at and design the formats or the retailing the way you want to do it. And I'm wearing the retailer's hat in this. And the third one will be post Jan, because traditionally Sankranti onwards, 14th of Jan onwards, the business slightly declines till the end of March, and that's where we have the end of financial year where now it's being changed. But that will be the long-term planning in terms of my mind. Secondly, I won't, if I have to wear a retailer's hat, either for furniture or for electronics business, I won't go by now one size fits all. I will have to go down by product, what I sell. I will have to look at, or by the category by category, or if you are a retailer, you will have to look at retail format by format. If I was running the electronics store or a furniture store or large appliances as a category within the electronic stores is something which is not essential. So that will take a while to take off. Having said that, coronavirus also has caused a lot of mindset
Ajit, you there? I think we will have to wait for Ajit to come back. I think he's facing some internet problems. Tanushree, the same question to you from distribution standpoint. How do you see the things evolving, food and some of the categories that you're dealing with?
Right. So I think, Anil, when we look at the COVID situation, right, and post-COVID, but let's start with what we are seeing in COVID, has been that the essentials item of food and pharma are something that e-commerce has not been able to deal with completely. Food, because of the volumes, like Deepak also mentioned, that you're not set up for that large scale, your base is small. And pharma, given that it's a regulated segment, right? So you can't really go and cater to people in bulk on the pharma side. And that's where what has happened is, in the COVID period, the local pharmacies and the local grocers, or the kirana stores as we call it, and there were a lot of people on the chat also asking, who've actually stood ground. Now, what has happened is, while these local kiranas and local pharmacies have stood ground, what has actually also helped them are marketplaces such as Udaan, because this is where the supply chain was functional, right? So I think in the COVID world, we've seen that there are these hyper local traditional distribution systems that have taken predominance, and which in turn have been aided by marketplaces, and they have really survived. I think going forward post COVID, for such items which are where frequent visits are required, where there is a repeat purchase, where there is a mix of old and young, right? And where people don't really now want to go into crowded spaces, there the local guy will, or the local shop, the kirana shop, the local pharmacy will continue maintaining their importance. I think what COVID has also shown to us is that, there is an interesting aspect of business that a local kirana wala or a local pharmacy wala does, is trade on credit. The guy knows how much credit to give to which customer, and they usually don't lose money, right? And again, that will stand in good stead, and marketplaces will work. I also think there's a second, and going forward, this will only become more and more important as coexistence happens, right? So e-commerce will not lose its importance, but e-commerce will fill in and be complementary to these traditional distribution channels. I think there's a second aspect that is going to emerge post-COVID in the larger world of food, as I see it. And this is not food in the terms of essential consumption, but this is food in terms of what we go out and consume. And I think there again, delivery channels will become important. Don't know how many people will be comfortable going out to a hotel and restaurant. So the e-commerce element over there comes into play. They're also delivering at the moment. I think other distribution channels such as pop-ups, home chefs will come up. Very, very small volumes, but they will come up. And I think innovation has already started happening in the entire Horeca segment, as we call it, in trying to see how do we use different channels to monetize and engage a consumer, with the combination of finally getting them to the old restaurant or pub. And I think one of the experiments that has been very interesting has been the one that's been started by Carlsberg recently, where they want to see right now and post-COVID, where people will still not be very comfortable going into crowded spaces, how can they manage their sale and their customers. So they've launched, this is an experiment they've launched in Denmark. You go on their website, you scan 4 barcodes of 4 Carlsberg beer bottles, and then you become a part of what is called Adopt a Keg. And once your nearest pub opens up, you can go there and you get a free beer. I think X number of free beers is what you get. And I say, so what I am saying is that in the larger food cycle, there will be coexistence of different supply chains, and it will not be one over the other. Contexts will differ from essentials to non-essentials, frequent to non-frequent, and from community to country.
Got it. Very interesting, Tanushree. The points you mentioned, especially with regards to food and grocery, are very interesting. And you were also alluding to certain aspects which Deepak was talking about. And I'm not sure whether Ajit is back or not. Ajit, are you there? Okay, so maybe he's still not there. So Bhati, would you mind checking with Ajit that if he requires any assistance in getting back? In the meantime, we'll carry on with our discussion with Deepak and Tanushree. So Deepak, you talked about modern trade, maybe in the short term, susceptible. The e-commerce going up, D2C a little bit going up, etc. Very quick answer from you that how about the distributors who are associated with your trade for a very, very long time, and would they be able to withstand the COVID impact and be there for the companies like you for a longer duration? Very quick answer on that.
Yeah, sure. So distributors will continue to be relevant. I don't think sub-dealers, distributors will lose their relevance, because the consumer behavior will be not to go into crowded places, not to go into places where there are too many people around. Small shops, small outlets will continue to thrive. And one of the weaknesses today which our retail system has is that even if you look at the largest of the modern trade, the penetration into tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 town classes is very low. E-commerce is developing those, while the growth is coming on back of, last year, if I see e-commerce growth came on tier 2, tier 3 town classes. But still, like Tanushree was saying, small shops, kirana shops will continue to be very relevant, and they will continue to contribute lion's share of the business in at least mid to...
You're talking about electronics in particular, is it?
I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about FMCD. I'm talking about FMCG both.
Okay. So I think FMCG, yes, definitely there is, because of convenience factor and the modern trades being in very low numbers, definitely that hypothesis remain a valid hypothesis to a large extent. We will talk about consumer electronics, particularly Deepak, with you, your take insights on that. So coming back to, let's say, some of the priority areas of supply chain, given, let's say, whatever is happening, D2C is emerging, the modern trade may not give you that much percentage share. What do you think are the key investments which get into the supply chain? And since we are running short of time, my request continues to be just give precise answers and we will move on to next question.
Yeah. Okay, at a strategic level, I think there'll be an investment in IoT, big data, AI to drive supply chains. But having said that, very, very three critical points I want to talk about is then one, the reliance on global supply chain will reduce, which would mean that, particularly on single point of sourcing, component sourcing, raw material, finished products will reduce. And subsequently, it could potentially lead to more positive encouragement of domestic production, manufacturing, and farming wherever possible. So there will be a focus of building indigenous supply for components and stuff. The second one, in my view, would be that as we are talking about a lot about home delivery, etc. So the consumer behavior, if moves that way more predominantly, many consumers will be prone to buy that way, and which will have a knock-on effect on businesses, because today's age and day, at least in our country, we are used to free home deliveries. We are used to, we don't want to pay for cost to serve. And for businesses to maintain that, they will have to build on cost to serve in their business model. and consumers will be willing to pay, will need to be willing to pay as well. Now, I don't know of audience if many people have seen the change in behavior of Paytm when you transfer money. That's all going to happen. Lastly, I think, again, in a lot of product categories, the product lines will evolve. Today, we are, I won't say we are spoiled for choices, but that's how the brands and manufacturers have developed, that there are tens and thousands of SKUs. I think focus will come on that. And, a lot of brands and manufacturers will focus on select SKUs which give, 80% of throughput.
Okay, so you're saying that it's a sort of a headline for us. What you're saying is there will be a rationalization of product portfolio.
That's what I believe going forward.
And to what extent you see rationalization would take place? I mean, 20%, 30%, 40%, what should
Well, I'm not able to quantify because I don't have any primary data point, but I see that that will happen. I was reading an article around China, where how PNG is evolving and how PNG is still able to control the market by rationalizing SKUs and also dominating the shelf space in retail. And so that's how that will happen. Multiple SKUs will go away. In my professional journey, I've seen that 80% of revenue comes from top 10, 12, 20% of your portfolio, which is what is going to happen, and I think will consolidate.
Agreed. So I think rationalization, IoT, technology investment would be key out here. So Tanushree, what's your take on supply chain part? What's their investments?
So I think, again, Anil, looking at different sort of segments and different sort of sectors of the industry, okay? I think one of the key changes that's already come in and it's going to intensify in the entire supply chain is health and safety. And I think after this, even consumers are going to be very keen on understanding that what comes to my doorstep, how hygienically was it handled, how hygienically was it dealt with. And to that extent, the investment in health and safety is going to increase, be it at the storage locations, be it during the distribution time, be it at the last mile. I think that is one investment which will need to be done. And for several categories, that will become far more critical than other categories where it may not make that much of a difference. And I think that's going to stay. I think the second thing I completely agree with Deepak is on this, there will be a lot of merit for localization. In a number of ways, we'd already seen a lot of localization happening, and that's going to pick up speed. And in my view, one disruption that's going to cause is on the entire taxation side. The entire taxation model in the country is likely to undergo change with what's happening in the geopolitical environment that we are in currently, which again will mean that either there is a cost to business or there is a cost to localization, but that cost will have to be borne. But ultimately, my read is that post-COVID, what every business will look on is to build a trusted, transparent, and risk-controlled network. And this will take its own form and shape in different aspects of operations. And because we are short on time, I'm not going to elaborate on that, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay, understood. So I think you emphasized on localization, and Deepak was talking about basically the cost of taking the goods to consumer, service to the consumer. And I do hope that the consumers now would be willing to pay slightly more premium compared to what they have done in the past, because still now the cost of delivery was completely borne by the logistics or the companies, and in turn by VCs were really taking the cost of the deliveries. So I think we have Ajit back online. Ajit, can you say hi to us so that all of us can hear you?
Hi everyone.
Very good, very interesting. So Ajit, I think you left at a point where
I had started, but
What
But
Deepak is saying, I could pick up from there, and I can just contribute. So if you look at the, if, with your permission, Deepak, I'm taking the example of LG. The last mile delivery and what Tanushree also mentioned, how hygienically it gets delivered to my home is going to be very, very challenging. And within that time frame I was defining, by September, it will be impossible for any company to turn it around and say that here is the batch of people whom I have trained. They will be COVID safe. They will be very hygienically trained, who can come into your household and install that AC, which takes 1.5 to 3 hours time. Washing machine takes about 45 minutes time to installation. So if I was an LG or if I was running an electronics store, I would use the current retail format for showcasing, bring down the inventory, bring down the SKUs, and use them to vehicle to sell it to the consumer and invest my money into the last mile delivery to the consumer so that it gets delivered properly. However, the other category like mobile phones and other things, I will look at it very differently, where I will pump the stocks into the store. So unlike the white goods which were pumped into the retailers' warehouses, there I will withdraw and hold it in my warehouses. Mobile phones and the imaging category, which is cameras, I'll pump that into the stores, and from the stores, I'll make sure that it gets delivered. That's the way I would look at in terms of management of inventory. On Tanushri's point, in terms of finance, a lot of consideration needs to be given. How do we manage the cash flow of not the retailers, but also of the distributors who play a major role, in this entire supply chain cycle?
exactly. Oh, so fantastic. I think so. What you are indicating, Ajit, is a very, very radical point. What you're saying is for certain categories, you don't require those many stores any longer. And you're saying that you don't require that inventory levels also, because you would say that is a showroom. Delivery is happening through some other channels, and which is far, far superior in terms of installation and a consumer interface than before.
And partners like LG have already made those investments.
Yes.
And the model which is propagated by Tanushri's company, they are covering the entire country. So the reach is far more than a single electronic retailer or a .com retailer can provide. So I will depend on Tanushri's company as an example, or with Deepak's LG or Samsung, and accordingly I'll work out my strategy as a retailer.
Got it, got it. I think for a moment I want to pause and go towards audience, because we have been they've been quite active on the chat. So I think we got into action a little bit late in this session. Audience, are you there? Are you happy? Are you enjoying? How are you feeling? Say yes if you're enjoying and no if you're not. Okay. Okay. So there are a lot of people who are saying yes and have not heard and no so far. So we continue our session then. I think there are a lot of yes. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind that this was initially supposed to be, and first of all, a big thank you to all of you. Again, there are 130 of you joined, and there are a lot of you already still there. Okay, and there is a meet which is going to come up in another 10 minutes or so. I would request you to please, stay with us for another 10 or 15 minutes because Ajit has joined back, Tanushri and Deepak are, more than eager to answer your queries. There is another thing which came up on the Tanushri, your organization, like your ShopEx or Udaan, digital, they're large, they're, maybe national.
Anil, I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Am I audible?
Okay, this is better. So your voice was in a static mode. This is better. Let's try this.
Okay. So am I audible once again?
Yeah.
Okay, Tanushree. So Tanushree, your organization, the digital distributor, national distributor, how are they playing a role and helping brands to reach out to the right set of retailers in the country?
So I think, what we have for brands today is a complete value proposition. What we bring is, so we are spread around, I think, almost 700 districts in the country.
Sure.
We are servicing a wide range of the country. We have our own logistics, and hence, that's something that we take care of for them. And more importantly, I think what we are doing is we provide credit to our buyers.
Sure.
So one of the key things that has always been missing for retailers is access to good credit, right?
Right.
And I think that's something that we are providing across categories. So be it essentials, non-essentials, that's something that we do. The second is we are also very cognizant of the fact that we are dealing with good quality retailers who necessarily take care that they are not dealing with spurious products, because that's the other thing that we want brands to be sure of, right? So I think that's the other value proposition we put out there, that our retailers, we screen them, or at least we have some amount of control over the fact that they don't deal with spurious goods. So I think, and I think the third thing is that we are very agile. We are, given that we have a huge tech infrastructure that we've invested in addition to our entire logistics piece, given that we have our own credit, and given that we're taking care of this spurious part, I think we're giving a very agile platform.
Okay, so very interesting, Tanushree. On 700 districts, one distributor, and very selective retail outlets. So this is a great proposition for any brand to start its operations in the country if one is looking for any great vehicle. So Ajit, I'll come back because you came a little late there. So Ajit, I want to understand, do you see certain changes in supply chain post-COVID? What kind of investments people would be making? Ajit, you there?
Sir, actually, Ajit sir have lost the internet connection, and he's connected with Himanshu on phone. So I'm just unmuting in Himanshu so that he can also speak.
Yes, please go ahead. Not a problem. Ajit, can you hear me?
Himanshu, please go ahead.
Yeah, Ajit is with us now.
Ajit, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So Ajit, quickly talk about the supply chain changes which you feel going to take place during the COVID times.
So, Anil, a couple of changes what I have noticed during the COVID, and I have seen, hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Which are going to continue, because there is a retailer who's already thinking of putting close to 200 stores in the Delhi NCR region for vegetables, as an example. What's happening currently in Mumbai is most of the societies or the complexes are getting direct supply of vegetables from the farmers. The feeder cities being Surat and Nashik and Pune. We directly get those vegetables delivered in those complexes, and it's directly from the manufacturer to the end users. Based on this, there is a retailer I know who's looking at putting 200 stores, small stores, in NCR Delhi, and if that's successful, he's looking at putting that in Mumbai as well. The other thing which has happened, there's a video which is being shared in select groups where DMart, one of the finest companies for Kirana retailing, or supermarket, has started going to the complexes with long so on. Again, but it was across to the society's responses so that customer can deliver. Now, a supermarket is taking a drastic change like that or making changes into their supply chain. People are going to innovate. Another company out of Calcutta, wow, as of today, they are signed with Procter & Gamble, ITC, and various other companies for supplying groceries to their customers. You just need to log into Swiggy, and they will deliver to your places. So different models are going to get implemented. I see something similar to that happening in the mobile phones category, electronics, where you dial out a retailer and say that this is the phone I'm going to look at, because all the information about the mobile phones, you get it on internet, and the product comes straight from the manufacturer. There are no changes, alterations, or adaptations possible. So the entire model, I think it was covered in your presentation as well, and this is where the bikers will make a difference in terms of quick delivery.
Got it.
Happening on the retail front.
Got it. So you're also mentioning that there are several categories which would lend themselves to direct-to-consumer format.
That's right. In fact, even gold retailers like Tanishq and others also will have to innovate how they reach out to their end consumers, because if they increase the catalog online and limit to certain items, they will be in a position to deliver those items at customers' residences.
Okay, so that's the mantra which we are hearing from all the experts. Deepak, there is a question for you from Bikram saying that what should be the inventory levels for e-commerce in this situation for your category?
So there's no right and wrong answer. I mean, coming from a manufacturer side, I think, the optimal answer to that is basically what are the replenishment cycles and how you are looking at run rates. There are certain products which are fast moving and you may want to have very quick replenishment cycles. And there are certain products which are small and therefore you may have to keep longer cycles there. But I think the most important part is the last mile fulfillment in the warehouses of retailers. Now, the way things are moving in e-commerce, Bikram, you may know that there was a time when e-commerce retailers expanded their FCs. Then last year they contracted it. This year, the buzzword which I'm hearing is that that's the area where they want to optimize the cost, and therefore further optimization and new ideas are coming out. My answer would be that to respect the SLAs with consumers, etc., 4 to 6 weeks of inventory will continue to be must.
Okay, that's a very precise answer, Deepak. Thank you so much. So going to Tanushri, how do you see the operations evolving? You touched in the sense that given whatever the conditions are going to be for COVID, how do people like you would operate in a hygienic environment?
So I'll tell you what we are doing, Anil, currently, right? I think what we've done, because our essentials business is on, so we are currently ensuring that the warehouses are regularly sanitized,
yes, and
disinfected.
Sure.
All the people in the warehouses are given the essential PPE gear. People out on the field who are there for delivery are given the right PPE gear, right? I think this is only one part of the operations. I think the second part of the operation really, which will become differentiated going forward, is when we start looking at the entire logistics piece. COVID has suddenly necessitated the need for medical insurance, which is not something that normally people in our country thought about. And suddenly this is something that people are talking about. And so from an operational cost point of view, this is going to come in. I think there will be a lot of merit for the hub and spoke model in logistics also, specifically given what we saw when interstate movements were halted. So operationally, that's the other thing that's going to become more and more important. And I think technology operationally is going to start playing a very vital role, because people will start to now want to know, how well can they track every movement that's happening, right? And for that, Deepak was talking about investments in IoT, investments in AI. All those investments will go up, and operationally, these will become mandatory to some extent over a medium period of time.
Okay. Okay. Great, Tanushree. So before, and you, all of you talked about the importance of consumer and customer experience going forward, and the movement from stores to at home is what all of you emphasize, whether food or pharma or let's say the consumer electronics categories. And I think that's where we thought it is appropriate for us to have another separate session. We are going to talk about the webinar 4. Webinar 4 is, ladies and gentlemen, is going to focus on the customer experience and what exactly you need to do to ensure that you reach out to the customers through sales, through your organizational changes, and through basically the digital part. Because digital, as speakers are saying, technology, as people are saying, is going to play a very, very important role in not only your operations, but also reaching out to consumers. So there is a link which is flashing now at this particular point in time. If you want to take register, please do so, because we are already getting tremendous response. Welcome you in that webinar as well. Okay, I think before we wrap up, just Deepak, Tanushree, Ajit, your last word on how do you handle distribution in India given what is COVID, and maybe a one-liner or two-liner is what we would like you to give. Deepak, you may start then.
So I think I look at distribution as channel shift primarily. So as they say, change is the only constant. What we saw in last few years, in early formative years of at least my career, that how modern trade was shaping up, and then we've seen e-commerce shaping up. I think this channel landscape will continue to change. E-commerce will become more and more important across categories, because that's what consumers will get accustomed to. Truly, like they say that there was an age for industrial revolution. This is the COVID has uniquely provided an opportunity for digital revolution. So that way, a lot of things are going to change: digital payment, digital content consumption, digital buying. All that is going to change. With that, I must also say that in a very, very vast, geographically segmented market, we will definitely have offline staying as relevant, albeit that they may be catering more to certain niches, etc. So the mix will change, but like they say that in India, if you want to bring in everything sells and everything works, all channels may work in tandem. And D2C, the main, the topic of this session, D2C will start coming in. I just want to remind of audience that those who were born in late 90s and or who were there seeing things in late 90s and early 2000s, there was a concept of brand stores, which a lot of electronic brands used to run. That was actually a very native format of B2C. It is just that the cost of excruciating cost of running those channels was very high, and therefore a lot of brands started going away from it. But with this coming in, B2C will come in back. and it'll take the avatar of online there. And that's where, overall, I feel online channel will have a lot of edge over other channels.
Okay. Okay, that's fantastic. And so, Tanushree, your last words.
So, I will actually say, and I'm not going to stick to food or pharma, but I'm just going to say an overarching reality today that's there for distribution across categories, right? And even services, they need to adapt. I think COVID has taught us that we need to adapt, and the most stark example of adaptation has been telemedicine. I mean, that is one distribution channel that could not take off, and today the government has sent out guidelines for telemedicine. It's an extreme example, but I think that sort of adaptation will define which sectors, which customers, which businesses thrive. The next principle I'd say is they would need to be agile. And I think, again, taking a very extreme example in this would be when the Reserve Bank of India came out with the moratorium guidelines for banks. They were working at 20% of capacity. Their systems were not geared up. One question was, how are they going to implement it? But all of them have operationalized it. And they have reached out to customers. Even NBFCs have been able to do it. So agility matters, because at the end of the day, it's the customer that matters. And distribution networks only help us reach the customer. And I think the last thing that COVID is teaching us, and post-COVID world, in my view, which would be very nice to see specifically in a country like India, would be collaboration. I think collaboration, I'm extremely pleased to see one example of collaboration, which is ITC and Domino's. This is the first time I say that two Indian companies have come together in a large way to serve a common need. And I see this going a long way forward. So adapt, be agile, collaborative are the ABCs of distribution network post-COVID.
Oh, okay, fantastic. Thanks, Tanushree. Ajit, you're there. Can you speak?
Yeah, I would say, we are going to see some kind of a mini revolution which will happen in retail. A lot of formats, either they will succeed, people who don't adopt will have to shut the format, and people who have been harping about that their business will do very well on e-commerce, those businesses also, and I know certainly for a couple of formats which will not even, e-commerce even stronger, they will not work. So they will have to take some hard calls. Businesses like Udaan will dominate, and people, whether they like it or not, they will have to partner with these kind of distributors. Large organizations which had the manufacturing in China, overnight is not going to shut. So how much we don't want China to be part of it, a lot of manufacturing will move to India, but it's a long process, and large white goods or electronic manufacturers which are based out of China will find it difficult to cater to the Indian market. So in short term, there might be shortages of some products, but we'll have to face that. Secondly, there will be a massive change in terms of payment gateways. People will move, and they will be forced to move to the electronic payments in a much better way. And secondly, the problem I faced, the connectivity will be forced. The companies like Vodafone, Airtel, Jio, they will have to force themselves, or they will have to reorient themselves to adopt the new technologies and the spread across the country. So e-commerce has to thrive.
Got it. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end of this webinar. We had very interesting key takeaways. At least I had some very interesting key takeaways from the experience of the three distinguished speakers. I'm going to summarize in another minute or so, and thereafter, my request is that if you could participate in the feedback, we will be very, very obliged to you. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, there are many key takeaways that one can take. The landscape, the channel landscape is likely to change dramatically in the short term. may not be permanently, but that mark will be visible after 6 months also. And we talked about how modern trade may shrink a little bit, e-commerce may go up, the direct to consumers will also go up. That's the almost a consensus out there. It is category specific, but still broadly that's the consensus out here. The other thing which is coming out very clearly is the need for automation. Okay. Because given, let's say, the labor, the sensitivity of the COVID situation, a lot will need to be automated. We have been talking about that warehouses in India, for example, are not automated. Labor is cheap and therefore the manual work still prevails. But with coming of COVID, you may think about automating a lot of their big warehouses, etc. It may also, it's a necessity. And of course, relevant technologies we talked about, blockchain, Patichi from the audience mentioned, Vikram also mentioned, the blockchain, the IoTs of the world will play a very important role, etc. Very important point which came out was that certain showrooms will become not these, rather certain stores will not become store, they may become showrooms, okay, which means lesser inventory, and the consumer sees from there, but actually the delivery takes place at home. So D2C component become very important. We have to reach out to the consumer at their home at their time in the condition she wants us to. Last very important point which was highlighted by many of the speakers is that adaptation, flexibility, and agility and collaboration. These are 4 mantras of the time going forward. And one would like to adopt all these traits, leadership traits going forward. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time and your engagement. We would now request you to please fill a small form so that we have a feedback coming from you. We can improve on that. And at the same time, I'd like to thank our esteemed speakers. Deepak, thank you so much. Tanushri, thank you. And Ajit, it was highly, I understand there are a lot of problems at your end, but you managed somehow. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.